Breaking news. Conflict in Ukraine and the resurgence of American imperialism. There was never much concern for Kyiv's future. Restoring the strength of NATO and, by extension, the United States, is the true objective. Sometimes nuggets of wisdom shine through the garbage that fills the op-ed page of the New York Times on most days. Gray Anderson and Thomas Meany's recent guest column is illustrative. NATO isn't what it says it is, the headline cries. Anderson and Meany argue convincingly that the alliance's primary purpose from its inception was not to deter aggression from the East and certainly not to promote democracy, but rather to bind Western Europe to a far vaster project of a US-led world order. European allies showed respect and made concessions to the United States on issues like trade and monetary policy in exchange for security guarantees during the Cold War. They state that NATO has been remarkably successful in their mission. Europe, a piece of land highly prized by the upper classes of the United States, became the focal point of the American imperium after World War II. These arrangements were called into question after the Cold War finally ended. To ensure NATO's continued existence, its supporters argued that the alliance must relocate, out of area or out of business. NATO adopted an activist stance, which led to rash interventions in Libya and Afghanistan aimed at building states. The outcomes were unfavorable. NATO's credibility as a military-capable enterprise was severely damaged by giving in to U.S. pressure to venture out of area. Step forward, Vladimir Putin, hero. NATO has been able to reassert itself as the primary instrument for defending the West in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, much like the United States has been able to forget its own military failures in the wake of 9/11. This has been accomplished without actually requiring a blood sacrifice from either the United States or Europe. The actual future of Ukraine is somewhat incidental in this discussion. The real problem is how to restore American hopes for global preeminence that have been damaged by recent events. The United States national security establishment is nearly unanimous in its belief that the United States must remain the world's sole superpower, despite the overwhelming weight of evidence pointing to the rise of a multipolar order. Putin's carelessness was a timely present in that regard. A touch of brilliance has been applied here. The means to restore the image of American indispensability lost in the decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall is to defeat Russia without having to do any actual fighting. Anderson and Meany are correct in their assessment that Washington is concerned about much more than whose flag flies over Crimea in Ukraine. NATO, and the NATO lobby in Washington, will feel vindicated if Ukraine wins its war with Russia, however winning is defined and however high a price Ukrainians must pay. You can rest assured that the major European nations will quietly back out of their pledges to increase their military spending, leaving the United States once again responsible for the security of Europe. The United States will maintain a permanent military presence in Europe despite the approaching centennial of the end of World War II. The military-industrial complex in the United States will be celebrating this news. Because of American muscle flexing, an enlarged NATO will focus on enforcing the rules-based international order in the Asia-Pacific region, with China as the designated adversary. The US and its allies will use Ukraine as a model as they exert influence thousands of miles from Europe. The United States will increase its global military presence. Attempts by the United States to straighten things out at home will fail. Urgent international issues, such as the climate crisis, will be ignored. The point of the game is, however, for the empire without a name to survive. The world has reached a inflection point, a term frequently used by Vice President Biden to imply the need for a new course of action. But his foreign policy is characterized by a commitment to status quo. He still believes in the geopolitical reasoning that led to the establishment of NATO in 1949. That reasoning may have held water back in the day, when Europe was feeble and Stalin ruled the Soviet Union. The current emphasis on NATO, however, is evidence of the failure of American strategic thought and the inability of the United States to properly prioritize its foreign and domestic interests. The United States should begin revising its national security strategy by announcing a timeline for withdrawing from NATO and allowing Europe to take full control of the organization. The fact that the United States taking such a step seems impossible demonstrates the lack of creativity in the nation's capital.